Welcome to biology. In this video, we are going to talk briefly about some of the scientists that help to contribute to our understanding of what cells really are and help to discover them in the first place. Now again, I want you to remind you that not all cells look the same. They each have slightly different structures or different forms, and that really determines what these cells can and cannot do. So cells were discovered in a couple phases. In the beginning phase, we have Robert Hooke. So back in 1665, Robert Hooke was a botanist, and he started looking at plants and looking at the things around him, and he built these pretty cool early microscopes. And these microscopes he used to look at these thin sections of cork. So cork, like a cork that's used to cork a bottle, that's made out of the tissues of a special type of plant. And if you take a very thin slice of that cork and look at it under a microscope, you will see a bunch of little boxes all lined up in neat little rows. Now, Robert Hooke was the first guy to view these under a microscope, and he started thinking that these must be some kind of basic units. These must be some small little building blocks of this overall structure and this overall plant. The second person that you need to know is Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Now, van Leeuwenhoek was not a scientist by training. However, he was a scientist by practice. So he asked questions about the world around him and tried to find answers. So what van Leeuwenhoek did in 1674 is he developed his own version of the microscope and just started to look at everything around him. He looked at the gunk on his teeth, he looked at the microbes that were living in fabrics and curtains, and he looked at pond water. And when he looked at pond water, he found that there were these little tiny organisms zooming around and single-celled critters living in that water. Now that was pretty surprising because at that point in time, people didn't think that there were things living in the water. So he wrote some letters to his scientist friends, and they all kind of laughed at him, and they're just like, "You're crazy, that's not really something that's there." However, many years later, other scientists were starting to believe that, hey, maybe there really is something to this, and van Leeuwenhoek was really onto something. The last group of people that you need to know are Matthias Schleiden, Theodor Schwann, and Rudolf Virchow. Now, these three guys worked together to develop what's called the cell theory. So you need to know that these are the three scientists that came up with that idea. Now, this is many years after Robert Hooke and Anton van Leeuwenhoek. So the first piece of cell theory is that all living things are made of one or more cells. And in fact, this is one of our 8 characteristics of all living things. The second piece is that cells are these basic units of structure and function in living things. So when you break that living thing down, a cell is that smallest living unit. And the third piece is that all cells come from currently existing cells. So cells don't just spontaneously come out of nowhere. They come from some previous cell, and they do that through cell division. And we'll talk about that later in the course. So make sure you know these 5 scientists and the 3 pieces to the cell theory.